So let's look at that world, the native world a bit. And this is, it got a little cut off, unfortunately, but I want to show you something really amazing here. If you look at this map, you may notice something that helped to confirm what we were talking about before about native migration. So take a look at the language families in North America, and that of course extends down also into Mexico. And what do you notice that's really kind of sealed the deal about all of this, about migration and people coming across and all that? Do you see anything intriguing here? And I'm looking specifically at this down here. So these are people that would be in the Southwest, extended to Texas, Arizona, and so on. New Mexico, probably. What else do you notice? Oh, I see some pockets of common language for sure. So one of the things in general that is showing, of course, is that there was migration. People were spreading from here, very likely, to there. Interesting. And this one is really, okay, 2 Athabascan groups. Exactly. Well, take a look at this. Thank you, Jacqueline. That you got that. So look up here. This is an Athabascan language group up here. So this is the family of languages that we call Athabascan. And guess what happens? They're also down here. So we know that they didn't go in that direction. They came from the land bridge. Many of the people settled here because the land bridge was closed off from the rest of North America for a long time. So they had a chance to really spread out from Alaska and the Yukon all the way to Hudson Bay. So this would extend much further towards into Alaska too. But then look what else happens. They're down here. So there we go. Did somebody want to, Maurice, did you want to say something? Or somebody else?
This is Ed Markham. I noticed that the Eskimos stayed up north. They never drifted south. Is there a reason for that?
Yes. So here's what's going on. Let's take a look at where that language family is. So Eskimo Aleut is really a language family, which then is an ethnicity. It's a group of people. And let's see where they are. They are in the far north around Hudson Bay. They're also on the edges of Greenland. These people, we know that they had to have come much later. So they're newer arrivals to North America than the rest, because this land was covered by ice, okay? The Athabascans that are up here also had to have spread out from parts of Beringia that were not covered by ice, but everyone up here is in lands that during the Ice Age would have been completely covered over. So they had to have come over less than 10,000 years ago. Everyone else probably came more like 20,000 or 24,000 years ago. So these are the relative newcomers into North America. One thing I guess we can say is that the further south the group is, generally, probably the earlier they came. Not always, because some people just stayed in their same area, but if they're way down here, very likely they're going to come earlier than the people up here, right? It just makes sense, because if everybody's coming from Asia, they didn't have the time to trickle down to this part of the world. So that's what's going on there with the Eskimo Aleut. These are the newest people. And if you look at appearances, they usually look the most Asian. So just looking at people's appearances, they had less contact or interaction with other people in North America, even with other Native American groups. So they're going to look, they have much more of a connection in their appearance to Asians, because they came over and did not have, as much of the contact with others. It's really an unbelievable and fascinating thing that goes on with this. And I'm going to mention one other thing related to the Native American landscape here in North America and South America. Most of the people, most of the DNA that we find coming down into the Americas seems to be zeroed in. I don't have a map of it here. In a certain area of Russia that borders Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and China. And I'll put in the name of that area is something you may want to look into. Whoops, that's a direct message I want to get to everybody. Hang on, everybody, everyone. Okay, so it is the Altai Mountain. So if you look at that region that's in Russia but overlaps those four countries, it seems like that's the DNA. The people that live there today actually have a match with many of the Native Americans. So the conclusion is that the folks that came over probably had sort of a mixture of like kind of a Central Asian mixture, more so than an East Asian beginning. And that might contribute to the appearance of many, many Native Americans today. They're coming from that area that's kind of not quite East Asia, but more what we would think of as like Kazakhstan in that general region. So it's a very, very interesting thing to kind of, delve into that. The Eskimos very likely came from the East Asian genetic pool, and they're coming over in more recent times. So you see people that really match up more with the folks that would come from Eastern Siberia. Okay, so it's amazing stuff. It's fascinating stuff to look at all of that. Let's see if anything, okay, so let's go on and look at some other stuff here. Okay, so we talked about food, and I wanted to show you what I was saying before about how North America was kind of like a backwater when it came to biodiversity. I found this really interesting chart that, it has all the details here of the different foods. So wonderful thing to look for. And by the way, if you want to find this chart and many other really good ones, all you have to do is go to this website. I'm going to put that on. It's called the Visual Capitalist. I use these for my classes all the time, my undergrads. There's so many good images on here. Take a look at this. This is fascinating. So we were talking before about how this part is a really important connection between North and South. It has much more biodiversity than up here. And to some degree, considering how much smaller this is, it has quite a bit compared to South America even. So the Native American groups here absolutely were at a disadvantage as far as food and other geographic things that were going on. The foods that could migrate up to North America would have made a huge difference for them. And corn was a very important one that got up there. Now, if you compare this to the old world, the world which Columbus was coming from, can you imagine how much more diversity was available to people in this part of the world compared to here? In many ways, not that this was the only thing that was going to lead to them being more powerful so that they could come over here rather than vice versa. It was all part of a kind of a contribution to why this part of the world was, technologically superior to the people here. There's just so much interaction going on biologically, technologically, and such that eventually somebody is going to break free of the coast and come across here to a land that is essentially more isolated than what's happening over here. So I love this because you can really get into the details of what's being grown in different places and how everyone here eventually is going to be able to benefit from all of the materials that are going to be available to them way before the people over here. Okay, stop me if you have any questions on this stuff. Oh, Doug asked, was Russia's claim to Alaska reflect the migrations across the bridge? No, that's a really interesting point. That's not what they were doing. They didn't really justify the claim at all because there was nobody challenging them at the time. So when Russia is extending the Russian Empire to Siberia, and then Peter the Great says, I want to find out what's going on the other side, and he has Vitus Bering go all the way to the edge there and figure out that Russia and Alaska were separated. there was nobody who was going to say, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing, claiming Alaska after that? Because it was so far away that there were no other European powers that had gotten there. So it was basically a free-for-all. They were able to go in there and claim Alaska. And the reason why they claimed Alaska was because of something they called soft gold, and that were the otter pelts. The sea otters that were along the coast in Alaska were so valuable that's why they did it. And there was no one who was going to, challenge it or question it. It's only a little bit later that the British and the Spaniards and eventually the Americans get in on the act. But that's how far away and unknown that coastal area by the Bering Sea was in the early 1700s when Bering actually went on the expedition. Okay. I read that the U.S. bought. Yes. So what will happen is, just to bring it up there to Alaska a little bit. So whatchamacallit. So Bering is going to be commissioned by Peter the Great to figure out what's going on in the eastern part of their empire. And that would be the Pacific side of Russia. He doesn't know if the land is connected to Alaska or not. There are all kinds of theories and rumors. He wants to know what's going on there. So Bering is going to cross Siberia overland. They're going to construct boats in the Kamchatka Peninsula, which is a peninsula jutting out over there. And that's when they're going to head across and see Alaska for the first time. No Russians up at that period had seen it. There was somebody, to not get too sidetracked, there was somebody who had seen it also about 100 years earlier. But this is the first official sighting that Peter the Great is going to be aware of. So what will happen from that is the Russians are going to be involved in Alaska in the sea otter trade. They're going to make some very decent money from that, but eventually it's going to get very difficult to maintain Russia-Alaska, because to bring food to the people there was really tough. You can't really grow it in Alaska. So they had to get colonies for growing their food further south, like in California. It got so tough to just support this, outpost, that they said, you know what? Let's liquidate our assets. We have enough going on here with the Crimean War and all this other stuff. We'll sell it to these unsuspecting Americans. And America actually bought it, and that's what Seward's Folly is. So $7.2 million for Alaska. You can imagine what Congress was saying. They must have said, this is insane, crazy, stupid. What are we wasting our money for? But we ended up buying it right after the Civil War. So they unloaded it on us, and that's essentially what happened. Yeah, so that's a whole other fascinating thing to get into. As much as we have the idea of the New World, of discovering places here that the Europeans find out, that's another new world. The Europeans coming to this part of the world. So we focus very much on here from 1492, but in the 1700s, this is a new world. The Europeans have no clue about these lands, and little by little, it will get to be more known to them. Fascinating other story for another day to get into more detail on. Okay, so let's go on and see what else we have. So we talked about this idea of food exchanges, and this is this thing that we call the Columbian Exchange. All of these are coming to the New World, and vice versa. So this is going to cause such ripple effects in Europe, because suddenly things are available for people that they never could have imagined before. And one of the big ones is going to be quinine. Quinine is coming from something called Peruvian bark. This is something that the Spanish were noticing that native people were using for stomach ailments in South America. And eventually they're bringing the bark back here, and it develops into quinine. That's huge. This alone is eventually going to cause a tremendous population surge in Europe and also the rest of the world. But this stuff, in many ways, is going to be earth-shattering. Many of these things are really going to change health, diet, many other things for people in this part of the world. So I just wanted to show you some of the basic stuff that we take for granted today that either come from here and went there or vice versa. Okay, and I think we talked last time about plagues and such and sicknesses. Well, you can see that most of them are starting from here and heading there because they're coming with the animals that we that will be used for livestock eventually in this part of the world. The only one that we think, that scientists think went from this direction to there, from here to there, is syphilis. So syphilis probably was originating here, and it's going to make its way into this part of the world and really plague people starting in the 1500s. Okay, so let's look at some other stuff that we've got here. I'm going to go past that one, and let's look at a few other things. I'm going to go I want to look at the world of Europe in 1492, and let's look at what's happening at that point. Now, the important thing to notice about Spain is that Spain is a united group of kingdoms in 1492. That's going to be significant in Spain making the decision for Columbus to go across the Atlantic Ocean. Up until then, Spain was very much fractured. There were separate kingdoms, and many of them, up until this point, were independent. But in the south, there were areas that were controlled by the Moors or the Muslims. Moors meaning people from Morocco down here. Now, getting into that a little bit, in the year 711, the Moors down here snuck across the Mediterranean in fishing boats and ended up overtaking an unsuspecting population in Spain. And eventually, they're going to take the entire Iberian Peninsula, and they're going to try to extend their rule up to France as well. That's not going to happen. They're going to be repelled, but they end up in Spain for more than one part of Spain or another for more than 700 years. They're certainly going to make their impact here, architecturally, language-wise, culturally. Many words in Spanish actually have Arabic roots, which is another interesting thing that you may want to delve into on your own. Lots and lots of words. Some of what I'm just going to show you really quickly is wherever you see a Spanish word that has Guada in the beginning, like Guadalupe or Guadalajara, Guadalquivir, which is a major river in Spain, it actually, does anyone think they may know the Arabic word that really is? What do you think? Guada. What does it sound like in Arabic? I'll give you a clue. It has to do with a valley. Anybody? Okay, I'll give you that one. You've done so much, I'm going to give you this one. Wadi. So a wadi is a dry river bed, all right? And so when you see Guadalcanal or Guadalajara, it's really wadi. That's just one example of the huge impact that Muslims and the Moors are going to make in Spain in the time that they're there. Okay. One of the significant events that occurs in 1492 is Spain is able to repel the last of the Moors in Granada, down here. And once that happens, Spain is going to be united. It's going to be many affiliated kingdoms that come together as Spain. So once that occurs, Spain is able to start focusing on other things. And one of them is a competition they have with their cousins over here, the Portuguese. They have much in common, but they also have differences, some linguistic differences, ethnic differences, and such. Okay, Portugal in 1492 was well on their way to becoming a major world power. And I like this map because it really gives the full picture of what's going on then. At that point, the Ottoman Empire had control over some really significant lands, including the entrance to the Black Sea. They were not going to allow the Portuguese to go through to conduct trade. They had some allowance for Venice, so Venice was allowed to, Genoa to a certain degree, but they were shut out, and so was Spain. Portugal said, you know what? We want to get in on the act. They had been developing technology that they could use in order to really take on these powers. One of them was something called the caravel. The caravel is a ship that is maneuverable. You can use it on the open ocean because of the sails that are movable, and you can play with the wind with them, so you can direct the ship in ways that you want to. And they were the first to really make those seaworthy to use on the open ocean. They got ideas from the Venetians, who had gotten the idea from the Arabians. So this is kind of a shared technology that they improved upon to make these ocean going. So what the Portuguese are going to start to do is to delve down to Africa. So their plan is, they don't know how big Africa is, but however big it is, they're going to round it, and they're going to make their way to the promised land, which is India and the Spice Islands, and maybe even China. So essentially the Indies that we were talking about before. They're making huge progress in doing that. And it's in 1497, by the way, that the Portuguese are going to successfully get to India. They're the first Europeans that are able to get around Africa and get there. So here's Spain saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? Look what they're doing. They're going to become really powerful and successful. We want to do that too. We also have a position on the Atlantic Ocean that we can take advantage of. And that's where Columbus came into the picture. He said, he's coming from Genoa, and he shopped around in different places to see who would be interested in his unbelievable idea of crossing the ocean. And eventually Spain is going to take him up on it, because they really do want to compete with Portugal. They want to find their own way that they can cross over to the other side. Now, some people may wonder, well, why didn't they also just go down the Africa route and just try and be better at it than the Portuguese? They were not allowed to, though, because both of them being Catholic countries, they had to obey the papal bull, the papal dictate that had come out, which essentially said that this was the route that the Portuguese had found, and it's theirs. The Spaniards, on the other hand, you can try a different way, but you cannot go down the Africa route. And because we're both, very much staunch Catholic countries, they followed that. They obeyed that. Now, other countries later are not going to. It's going to be the Dutch and the British, because they are not interested in papal bulls. They are not Catholic countries. So they're going to go and do what they want to do around Africa, but Spain never did. And that forced them in many ways to go in that direction. So that's also part of the story as to how 1492 germinated, by basically making the place a united group of kingdoms in Spain, no more control from the Muslims, and then wanting to compete with all of the incremental advances that had started with Prince Henry the Navigator in the middle of the 1400s. So that's a little bit more of this whole grand story of what's going on here. Stop me if you have any questions on this stuff. I'm going to go through some of this because we can't cover everything. So here's an interesting book if you're interested in the Moors and them coming into Spain, and it's called Año 711. And here is what they passed by, and that is the Strait of Gibraltar, and so on. So this is what they had in 750. They extended up through the Pyrenees into parts of France, but eventually they're going to be pushed back from that area. But it's incredible to think that they controlled parts of Spain for such a long time. And of course, in Spain today, we still see remnants of their control. And one of the places is Alhambra, which was a Muslim fort, and that's in Granada, and it means the red one. And it has Spanish architecture, which is really Moorish architecture. So when you think of the missions in California, which look a lot like this with the arches, it's really architecture to a large degree that had originally come from the Moors. And then it becomes adopted by the Spaniards, who then transferred over to the New World. So when we're talking about the Columbian exchange, this is another thing that's part of the exchange. It's an architectural exchange where we start seeing this architecture in many parts of Latin America because of the Spaniards, and also into the Southwest and California. Stop me if you have any questions on this stuff. In many ways, this does look a lot like missions that you would see either in San Antonio or in California. So it's interesting to think that these arches and such are something that was transferred from North Africa, and eventually we'll get to the New World and even parts that would end up being the United States. And this is the Great Mosque in Cordoba, just as some examples architecturally as to what was going on. St. James was the call to defeat the Moors was a call to Santiago or St. James, and the battle cry would be Santiago Matamoros. And if you take that apart, you'll see what Matamoros, which is a town in Mexico, what it means. It means kill the Moors. Okay, so it's St. James, kill the Moors. And that was the battle cry that was repeatedly used to try to push back, to try to resist the Muslim rule. Okay, not today, but sometime I would love to hear about the development of Ukraine. Your map showed it as part of the Khanate, and also, Ukraine is another fascinating thing to look at. Russia in general, and the world that was affected by Russia, fascinating stuff. Maybe that can be, something down the road at some point. It's a great suggestion. Thank you. So let's look at some other stuff here. Okay, this is the progression that's taking place. So here's Spain, and you can see by looking at the years what's going to happen. So the Spaniards are persistently able to push back Moorish control little by little. First, it's going to happen up here in León, Navarra, which is also Basque territory up in this area. And eventually, here's Castile, which is so important to the story of Columbus, because you all know that that's where Isabella is coming from. And then eventually, here we go. Granada is going to be the last place. Okay. That would be great. I would love to do that. All right. And I'm going to go past some of this and just show you some of the key stuff, because I see we only have about 10 minutes left. So this is Ferdinand and Isabella, and they're very important to the story of Columbus. It is she that eventually capitulated and said, okay, we're going to allow you to do it. He thought that Columbus was a nut the whole time, and he wasn't very much interested in supporting any of the expeditions. She was. So it was through Isabella that Columbus's expeditions actually got off the ground. It's important that the two of them get together. This is before 1492, but it brings two important, powerful kingdoms together in Spain, which will eventually add to the resources that are needed for Spain to be able to go on these tremendous oceanic voyages. They're going to get married in 1469, bringing Aragon and Castile together, two important kingdoms. Castile was the wealthier of the two. She actually came in with much more money into the marriage than he did, which is why we very often think of her as such a significant character in making decisions. It's not that he's at the focus all the time, but she very much is too, because she's coming with more money than he is. Okay. Notice another thing on here. They're called the Catholic kings. So the Reyes, actually it doesn't show it here, but they're very often called the Catholic king or the Catholic queen. And Catholicism was so important to them because it was during their reign that the Moors are being pushed out. And at that point, this is what will happen, which will be tragic for another population that's in Spain, the Jewish population. So there was a large Jewish population in Spain. And because this place, after 700 years, is finally having control and does not want foreign interference, what they decide to do is rid themselves of any groups that are not going to be loyal to Catholicism. They saw everyone else as a potential disloyal group that could again overtake their control. So because of that, there's an edict of expulsion that's going to be signed just about the same time that Columbus is leaving for his voyage to the New World. And the way the story goes is, if you're Jewish in any of the kingdoms of Spain, you must convert to Catholicism. And if you don't, you have to leave by a certain date. They gave them like a month to pack up and leave. They could not take their money with them. They could take their belongings, but they couldn't take their money. So it's estimated that probably about half of the population decided to leave, which is immense that many people decided, I'm packing up and leaving. Imagine you have your life there for hundreds and hundreds of years, your family, you've been there forever, but they packed up and left. The people that remained behind had to convert to Catholicism. And this painting is showing a secret Seder. So this would have been during Passover. And basically what it's showing is that many people still secretly remain Jewish. They were practicing Judaism secretly and probably thought, this will pass. We'll pretend we're Catholic, but we're really Jewish. But what ended up happening because of this is that many of them were reported on, people snitched, and that's when the Inquisition began, that was seeking out these people that were still secretly Jews. And the word that was being used for that was, they were called Marranos, but another word for secret Jews was crypto Jews. Crypto Jews. They were being secretive about practicing Judaism. And so if you didn't leave, you had to convert. That was essentially what the deal was. And those who were found to still be practicing, or maybe people suspected them even, could be reported to this tribunal, which was called the Inquisition, and then horrible things could happen. You could be executed, tortured, that type of thing. What is the origin of the term Sephardic? So Sephardic or Sephirad was a word for, I believe it might be actually a Hebrew word for Spain. So somebody who is a Sephardic Jew would be somebody who originates from Spain. Okay, so that's what that is. So Sepharad is Spain. And many of these Jews in 1492 that did leave, a lot of them are going to go to the Ottoman Empire. Some of them are going to start heading into Eastern Europe in kingdoms that would accept them. Many of them would eventually go to Poland, because Poland was always, kind of on the brink of poverty, and they saw this new population, many of whom were educated, could come in and help their economy. So that's why many Jews that actually have origins in Spain end up heading to Poland or to the Middle East. So this is another significant event that's happening in 1492 that in many ways is very much connected to Columbus's expedition, because Spain said, we are now consolidated, we are more powerful and wealthy because we're together and we don't have the Moors controlling us. Columbus, go figure out a way to the Indies. And besides that, we're now consolidated. We don't want invaders. We don't want people we don't trust who are different than us. The Jewish population has to leave or convert. So they're both, kind of interrelated to some of these big events with the Reconquista, the reconquest of Spain, where the Moors are being sent out. There you go. So it is from Hebrew. Spaniards are Jews of Spain, and Sepharad is Spain. So that's where the word is coming from. Okay, so let's see what else we've got. This is the actual expulsion edict that was written, and this was in Granada, where there was a large Jewish and Muslim population. And so, yeah, so the Alhambra decree is going to also initiate the Inquisition against anyone who stayed and is people are suspicious of. So all of this is going on during that period, and it was signed by Isabella and Ferdinand. Okay, I'm going to go past some of this stuff. Don't have time for it, but let's just look and see what happens, where the Jews go to in 1492. So in 1492, some are going to go back down into North Africa. Some are going to Portugal because they were allowed to be in Portugal until 1497. But then there was going to be a marriage between a Portuguese woman, one of the princesses, and with royalty here. And the Spanish said, if you want that marriage to go on, you too are going to have to get rid of the Jews in your kingdom. What will end up happening because of that is that many of the Jews that had come here, and there were a lot, because you can imagine it's the next door, that's where a lot of people are going to go to, they end up also going to the New World, to a Portuguese colony called Brazil. And they're going to be involved in agriculture and other economic pursuits in Brazil. So that's another source of Europeans coming across the Atlantic. Others are going to make their way 1492 down here into, Sicily, and so on and so forth. Many of these migrations had happened even before 1492 into these parts of Eastern Europe, but this is going to fuel even more people coming into these areas. Okay, and there is Ukraine again. That is so interesting, Crimea and so on. That really does warrant a lot of focus. It's a fascinating part of the world to look into. Okay, I'm going to go past some of this, and let's see what else we've got in the time that we have. All right, I'm going to go past this stuff. Hang on. All right, so this is going way back. I want to show you this Marco Polo route because we talked about that before. So it's the 1200s, and Marco Polo and his father and his uncle are going to leave Venice and take a look at the route that they're going to take. We call this the Silk Road, in order to get to China. Now, this is going to also give that motivation to Columbus, besides the fact that he thinks that the earth is smaller than it is, and he's looking for spice routes and such. He's really reading up on what Marco Polo had done. So Marco Polo is coming to China, and then he's going to loop around by sea, coming back. Now, notice what's going on here. He's coming down to Indonesia, and he's describing, what he's seeing. He's saying there are spices and riches, and it's phenomenal, and this is incredible. And that's what's going to help Columbus to decide that he's got to get there. He's also describing the islands that he sees, and this is going to confuse Columbus because he's reading this stuff and saying, it kind of is like what Marco Polo is saying, but not quite. This is also the basis for Amerigo Vespucci to say, this has to be a new world where I am in South America, because Marco Polo described the constellations that he was seeing from here, but Vespucci ended up much further south. So this is a huge deal. The fact that Marco Polo came through here and then ended up returning to Venice. Looking to see some other things that people have written here. Okay, were the Ashkenazi only in Russia? No, Ashkenazi were in anywhere from Europe, basically. Eastern Europe generally is what we think of as Ashkenazi Jews. So that would have been people from Hungary, Lithuania, Russia, Poland, all of that would be considered Ashkenazi Jews, essentially European Jews that aren't Spanish. would be Ashkenazi Jews. So yeah, there's a lot of findings now that Ashkenazi Jews are very much a mixture of Sephardic Jews and of course the local population. So it's just a whole kind of hybrid thing going on, as it is for most people. But most of the genotype seems to match up with Eastern European and also some from Western Europe as well. So I hope that helps a little bit with that definition. All right. Oh, I see another message coming in. Hang on. I love seeing this so much. Okay. All right. Let's look at some other stuff here. All right. Okay. I'm going to go past this. This is all another class for another time. There's so much that we can't get into here just on Constantinople and such. All right. I just want to show you a little bit on Africa. Oh, it looks like we're running out. I'm going to just show you really quickly. So when Prince Henry in the mid 1400s is encouraging sailors to keep coming down the coast of Africa, he has no clue as to what the size of Africa is. They actually were hoping that there would be a river, this sounds a lot like South America, that would cut through and bring them to India. But once they got here, they also realized how valuable many of the things were in Africa. And that is going to set up the Portuguese setting up trade with African kingdoms along the coast. Sadly, one of the things that will develop because of that in the 1400s is a slave trade. So these also become areas of intense slave purchase and such, slave capture. But beyond that, you can see what else is going on here. Gold, salt was another huge natural resource that was available that was going to be brought up into Europe. So by the Portuguese coming down here, it's really setting up that race in between the Spaniards and the Portuguese, because the Spaniards are going to realize, whoa, they're making lots of progress in getting down the coast. We need to figure out our plan B, the way that we're going to eventually get to the Indies. So that's going to set up a lot of the things that we ended up talking about as far as exchanges, biological exchanges, and conquest and so on. Okay, we covered a lot in a short period of time. I hope this made sense and you got some good information from this. Does anyone have any questions, anything that we can get into before we head out? Feel free to. And if you need to go, thank you so much for being here. If you want to hang around for a minute or so, just so we can talk about other stuff, I'm good. I'm happy to be here. Anybody have things they want to throw into the mix? Or other ideas you have for classes? Because I really like to pay attention to that when I develop things.
What about something, Judy, on the Ottoman Empire?
Okay, that's a great idea. That's something I can definitely think about. Yep. Thank you for that. Basques. Yeah, the Basques are really interesting. The language alone is fascinating because, you know, it's not related to other languages. So those people have been there with their culture for thousands and thousands of years, isolated from the rest of the comings and goings that were going on in Europe. It's incredible. Any other questions, comments on this stuff? We covered Alaska, a little bit of Africa, plants, food, breakfast, you name it, we got into it. African empires in the era leading up to the Atlantic slave. Okay. Yeah, something on Africa would be great. I actually just developed like a 3-credit class on the geography of Africa for Rowan University. So maybe that would just, you know, taking pieces of that, parts of that, maybe that would be something really interesting to do as well. So great suggestions. I got to think about this, and maybe I'll talk to Maurice about it if he would like to do that as well. Okay. Anything else? Questions, stuff? Okay, so thank you so much for spending more Spain. Okay. Thank you for spending some time with us on these Friday mornings.
Judy, great class.
Thank you. There's going to be a class on the development of the English language.
English, yeah. I'm signed up.
please sign up if you're interested in that. It should be really cool, really interesting. So I hope to see you there. Happy holidays. And hopefully I'm going to see you again soon. And email me if you have any questions on things like the books and the other information that I could share with you. I would be very happy to do that. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks again, Judy. Thanks,
Take care.
everyone.
Thank you.
Take
Thanks.
care. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.